Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here, and wonderful to be here among so many experts. I was very privileged to be invited to speak here, and I wouldn't describe myself or put myself among your ranks in terms of the expertise that many of you have of gambling. But what I do have is a journalist's perspective, and a perspective from many of the campaigners who've worked in this area over the years. So I think that's what I'd like to give you. In a sense, to your question, gambling is big business in Britain, with the Betting and Gaming Council saying its members contribute about 7 billion to the economy each year, generate 4 billion in tax, and support more than 100,000 jobs. And a key attribute of any successful industry is trust. Trust in the gambling firms, trust in their products, trust in the safeguards to protect the vulnerable, and trust in the regulator. And trust is going to be key as the gambling sector embraces the opportunities of AI, whether to improve revenues or improve safeguards for the vulnerable. But I have to say that record of some gambling firms on whether they can be trusted with customer data is, well, patchy. So I've been a reporter for more than 3 decades, and I've covered a lot of gambling stories in my career. So first of all, a mea culpa. And it refers back to the 2005 Gambling Act, which you've already heard mentioned. It created a new regulator, the Gambling Commission. It lifted many of the advertising restrictions, and really it fired the starting gun on Britain's online casino boom. But in 2004, when this act was being debated, I wasn't really preoccupied with any of those things. We were mainly writing, if you remember, about super casinos. It was proposed these super casinos would be opened across the country with US firms, MGM Resorts and Caesar Entertainment in the wings to open these huge complexes. The Millennium Dome was going to be turned into a hotel complex with a casino. There was going to be a super casino in Manchester. So that was a good story. It involved lobbying, US firms vying to get into the UK market, even John Prescott staying on a ranch near Denver, owned by a businessman, lobbying for a casino in the Dome. I wrote one of those articles at the Sunday Times, where I was for 20 years, about that visit, and John Prescott even commented on it the next week. These stories are a load of crap. But the outcry over all of this certainly made a difference. There were limits to the number of new casinos that could be opened, and the number of super casinos, or resort casinos, was ultimately reduced to 0. The Dome never opened its big hotel with a big casino. The super casino in Manchester was never built. So these super casinos were definitely a story. But we arguably missed the bigger story: the liberalization of laws that would allow the boom in online gambling. 2 years after the Gambling Act, another landmark moment that would have a huge impact on so many lives: the launch of the iPhone. It can be so many things to so many people, but one of those is a casino in your pocket. Between 2008 and last year, the revenues from online gambling in Britain went from less than 1 billion a year to more than 6.8 billion. Online gambling revenues, or gross gambling yield, on online casinos, including slots, was just £33 million in 2008. It's now more than 4 billion a year. And from a reporter's perspective, looking on, it looked like a free-for-all. There were no limits on maximum stakes for online gambling. There were no limits on prizes. There were no limits on speed of play. And with the rise in emails, texts, social media, players could be bombarded 24 hours a day with offers of free bets and bonuses to play. What could possibly go wrong? One of the first concerns about the surge in gambling was not online, but as you may remember, on the high street. The fixed odds betting terminals in betting shops were described as the crack cocaine of gambling. Customers could bet up to £100 every 20 seconds. The maximum stake on these machines was cut from £100 to £2 in 2019. but there were no similar limits introduced for online gambling. But the risks were more acute in an online world where the shop was never shut and you didn't have to leave your room to place a bet. And it was in many ways a private world involving you, the online casinos where you played, and of course a regulator, who perhaps if you were a heavy gambler didn't seem too present. Private winnings, private losses, and sometimes private turmoil. The death of Jack Ritchie from Sheffield in November 2017 in Vietnam put the spotlight on the gambling industry. He had taken his life, and prior to his death, Jack's parents, Charles and Liz, just had no idea how dangerous and addictive some gambling products can be for some people. They were not aware of the devastating link between gambling and suicide. They set up the charity Gambling with Lives. I'm sure you all will have heard of it. But they really, for the first time, highlighted for many MPs, for many journalists, and the public, the involvement of gambling in suicides. In 2023, the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities produced the first official estimate between 117 to 496 gambling-related suicides each year in England alone. If you read the Prevention of Future Deaths report issued by the coroner over Jack Ritchie's death, it highlighted the failures involved. Insufficient warnings of the risk of gambling, a lack of available treatment. The regulation was not effective in stopping people who were gambling too heavily. But what campaigners like Charles and Liz also wanted to expose was the inducement, the often constant inducement to gamble for those who were at risk, the VIP schemes, the free bets, the bonuses. Gambling firms were often inviting customers into VIP schemes without proper checks to spot harmful behavior. Players would get their own VIP manager who would oversee their account. Customers would be invited for free trips to football matches and concerts. I wrote a story in 2023 about one of the people on these schemes. He's called Martin Sargent. He was a senior church official, and he was made a VIP as he went on various gambling sprees. He had a VIP agent, and he was given an array of gifts: a new iPhone, Louis Vuitton luggage, Ray-Ban sunglasses, and a Mont Blanc watch. Over 12 years, Sargent staked more than £12 million with one betting brand. So there's a lot of churn when you're playing these kind of games. You're betting, you're winning, you're losing, you're getting free bonuses, you're betting those again. But £12 million is still a lot of money. Didn't raise any red flags, either as to where the money was coming from or whether he might have a problem. So how was a senior church official getting all this money? £12 million, stake on bets. Well, he was stealing it. In 2022, Sargent was sentenced to 5 years in jail for the offence of fraud by the abuse of his position. He'd stolen more than £5 million in church funds. The defence legal team obtained for that case reams and reams of data that the betting firms held on him. But they hadn't flagged him as a risk. They hadn't raised concerns over illicit funds. So all of this raised a wider question for a reporter. What were they doing with all of this data? So earlier this year, me and a colleague at The Observer covered a judgment that was made against Bonterre Trading, which trades as Sky. It was trading at that time and still does, I think, as Sky Betting and Gaming. It's the story of a gambler who lost £46,000. And in many ways, the story is typical of a problem gambler. That period, it was 2017 and 2018. He describes it as a crazy time when all I wanted to do was gamble. But this case is fascinating, not just because of what he lost, but because of what he found. He used a tool that has been one of the most successful tools used by gamblers, trying to understand how their compulsion can be fed by gambling firms, a subject access request. And it revealed the inner workings of Sky Bet. The more than 1,300 emails he was sent offering free spins and bonus prizes, more than 2,400 spreadsheets of data about his play, from his spending habits to the exact times he played specific games. The creation of a DNA customer profile of his browsing habits, demographic characteristics, and customer ID, plus details of his gambling, his favorite games, when he played them, his wins, his losses, the links he clicked, the marketing he responded to, and so on, and so on, and so on. All this data, and the company failed to identify him as someone in need of help. Instead, he was coded as a high-value customer. The High Court found the use of this data was unlawful, ruling that the compulsive nature of the man's gambling meant his ability to give consent was impaired. The company has said it has made real significant changes since that time, but it also fundamentally disagreed with the ruling, and at the time we were reporting it was considering an appeal. But Charles Ritchie from Gambling with Lives said what this case was showing is how, in some cases, companies are using all that data and the algorithms that they have to shower people with more incentives to gamble, rather than using it effectively to work out whether they should meaningfully intervene with someone who might have a problem. And that's the issue. The gambling firms often have to ask themselves, we've got all of this data, are we using it properly? They certainly use it effectively for marketing, but as this case has showed, and other cases have shown, not always for protecting the vulnerable. Luke Ashton, who's from Leicester, took his life in April 2021. And the inquest into his case found that gambling disorder was a contributory cause of death. The online gambling site Betfair was made an interested party in the case. And in this case, the Prevention of Future Deaths report, which we covered at the time, said Ashton had been assessed as low risk, and the algorithm to monitor gambling had failed to flag him as a problem gambler. Luke's gambling was the most intensive in the weeks leading up to his death, but he was only sent automated safer gambling emails. The regulator wasn't asleep on this. A few months before he died, the Commission's compliance team conducted an assessment of Betfair, and it found failures in the processes for identifying potential harm. The firm was put into special measures, and it came out in 2021. So this firm had failings. It was in special measures at the time of Luke Ashton's death. That sounds like effective regulation, doesn't it? But they didn't tell the public. And Betfair donated more than £635,000 to good causes to avoid formal regulatory action. So the questions for the regulator are, why is a firm put into special measures, and why is it considered a confidential matter? The regulator argues that special measures are not formal regulatory action, and there is an expectation of confidence in much of its work. And in this case, Flutter, which owns Betfair, said it's made a number of changes since 2021, and there are ongoing legal proceedings over this case. The Commission has also introduced a whole range of measures since 2005 to protect people at risk of gambling. A new code on the VIP schemes, new standards on speed of play. There's now a £5 limit stake for online slots for adults and £2 limit for adults aged 18 to 24. And in 2022 and 23, the Commission introduced tougher requirements for operators to identify and protect customers at risk of harm. So all this has been welcome, but would I describe the Gambling Commission ahead of the game? Were they ahead of the families who wanted every death which involved gambling to be properly investigated? Were they ahead of campaigners who exposed how firms were giving VIP status to problem gamblers? Were they ahead of the MPs who warned it was unacceptable there were no maximum stakes on online slots? I'll quote from this Public Accounts Report Committee of 2020, which Martin's already referred to. The Department and the Commission have an unacceptably weak understanding of the impact gambling harms have on people. There is a lack of either detailed measurable targets for reducing levels of harm or an understanding of the impact of any regulatory action, and both have lagged behind developments in the industry. So now we have artificial intelligence, and what is absolutely key about this is that we have the safeguards in place to protect the vulnerable. The Betting and Gaming Council says more than 22 million people in Britain enjoy a bet, and the most of them do it, the vast majority, safely and responsibly. But the story of those who become addicted to online gambling, the lost lives, the devastation of families, show us how technology can move so fast, it can leave the regulators in the dust. And that erodes trust. And when it comes to artificial intelligence and the gambling industry, the Gambling Commission cannot afford to lag behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for that powerful speech. If you'd like to take a seat.
Yeah. Okay.
And could I ask the other panelists to come onto the stage? I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. So please put your questions in the Slido or think about your questions, and we'll take all of the questions at the end of the session. Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. Raffaele Rossi from the University of Bristol, who I know very well, obviously. And Raffaele is going to talk about using AI in gambling harms research and give us an example of using AI to detect gambling adverts in his research. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I forgot the clicker. I need the clicker.
No. Can you? Oh, you got it.
Fine,
You got it.
Wait for time. I need my 8 minutes. There we go. Well, thank you so much, Agnes. Gambling advertising is everywhere. It's all over TV. It's all over radio. It's all over sports. It's all over our towns, right? And most importantly, it's all over the internet. In 2023, 2 years ago, Ipsos did a survey asking Brits, what do you think about gambling advertising? And over 2/3 of people agreed that there is way too much gambling advertising around. Now, this was before AI. This was 2 years ago. What AI meant to advertising and marketing was that it is easier, cheaper, and faster than ever before to create adverts. It became so easy. And what this probably most likely means is that the volume of advertising will continue to increase. And I think we as researchers, we have to play a part in that. We have to be quite adaptive, creative, and quick to also use some machine learning and AI methods to keep track of what's happening in order to identify harms early and to be able to inform policy appropriately. So in my couple of minutes, I want to show you 2 different studies that we've done where we use machine learning or AI to actually find something out about gambling marketing. So the first one was around using some machine learning and finding more out about gambling advertising on Twitter. So we worked together with Demos, which is a think tank from London, and we tried to find out, well, how much gambling advertising is there actually on Twitter? So we focused on only organic advertising, only by UK brands and their affiliates. And over 1 year, we found around 1 million organic gambling ads on Twitter only. So if you now include paid-for advertising and Instagram, Snapchat, all of the other social media platforms, this number is increasing drastically. So we're probably talking somewhere between 3 and 5 million unique gambling ads per year. So it is a lot. We also were interested in finding a bit out about what they're actually advertising. And so, for example, we used some keyword searches, and we found that 22% of the ads use something like free bets and match bets. We were also really interested in finding out more about the people who kind of engage with those social media ads. So basically those people who click like, comment, or share these ads. And what we found was that 2/3, over 65% of the people engaging with the ads were actually under 25. And when we looked at the followers, so the people who follow gambling accounts on Twitter, we found that 7%, so 41,000, were under the age of 15, so fairly, young children. This study, we've done this a couple of years ago, and this was done before, the boom of AI. And as I've said, AI made it much easier to create advertising, so we can assume that this volume has increased substantially since then. And so far, I've not heard any kind of convincing arguments by the Advertising Standards Authority how they want to keep track of these millions of ads, ensuring they're not breaching regulations. The other study I want to quickly talk to you about is based on our Premier League work. So since 2023, we've been doing this work where in the opening weekend of the Premier League, we were counting all the gambling messages during this one weekend. We did it the first time in 2023, where we found 11,000 gambling ads in 2023. A couple of months later, early 2024, after pressure from the government, the football leagues, together with the Betting and Gaming Council, co-created the Sponsorship Code of Conduct. One of the main aims was to reduce the amount of gambling advertising during football so that children, young people would see less of that. That was introduced early 2024. When we did it again in 2024, in the opening weekend in August, numbers have tripled up to 29,000. Well, you could say it was just, brands just had a couple of months to adapt to this new sponsorship code of conduct, whatever. But we just recently, this season again, have done this research, and now the number is at 27,400. So remained at the same level. So it's really hard to come to a conclusion saying this sponsorship code of conduct is working by any means. It doesn't seem to work. And you've got a copy on your tables with the exact summary about the newest study. But coming back to AI, so this stuff has been done by using humans. So basically what we did is we had to hire between 5 and 7 research assistants. We kind of locked them into an office for a whole week, and they did nothing else than counting logos. I think a couple of them are here. I'm really sorry for that. It must have been traumatic for you guys. Saeed has been doing it 3 or 4 times. You are almost as fast as AI now. But how this works. They watch the video, they pause. Every time they see logos, they put it into a spreadsheet, start again, pause again. When they see new set of logos, put it into a spreadsheet. It takes ages, right? 11,000 hard work, 29,000 insane, okay? Then in 2024, we said we have to think of something. It's 2024. There must be some other ways of doing it. We applied for funding at the Bristol Hub for Gambling Harms Research, got some money, and over the last 12 months, we developed AI, basically to replace the research assistants and just automatically count the logos. So we've been working on that for the past 12 months or so, and we are now at a point where it actually works really well. If you compare it to humans, so if human counted and then you let AI run, it's 96% accurate. So it's almost as good as humans, or same amount as humans, which is amazing. And there are some small issues, so I don't think we can completely replace humans in that respect. So for example, we didn't manage AI to actually detect where the logo appears. So is it front of shirt? Is it on the sides? Is it the hoardings? Is it advertising? It can't do that at the moment. It can only detect the logos and count the seconds for how long it appears. So there's still some work to be done, but I still think it's an incredibly valuable work, and I really enjoy doing it. And I think this graph is just worth all the effort, because we are now able to track over years what is happening, which is also going to help policymakers to evaluate whether the policies have actually any effect on the volume. So this is the AI kind of thing, how it does it. It detects all of the logos. You put basically all of the names you wanted to find into a list, and then it automatically runs through it, which basically means we don't need 5 people for a whole week and weeks of data analysis. This can now be done in a couple of hours with AI, which is amazing. So coming to an end. So what's next? So we all know the industry is developing incredibly fast, and they are the first to start using AI, and they've been using sophisticated data methods for years. So we as researchers, we need to start doing the same thing. We need to be more creative, and we need to be more brave in doing new methods and doing new ways of research, which I think we all have to do that. But on the same time, I also think that regulators play an absolutely important part, because the biggest challenge with that kind of work around AI and data-driven research is access to data. And the access to data is really hard, and I think we need to do more in that respect. So for example, in Belgium, all licensed operators have to provide marketing and behavioral data to researchers. And then researchers can actually use that data to go through it and to identify some markers of potential harm, and therefore help regulators to change policy. And I think we desperately need something like that in the UK as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Raffaello. So already we've got some great perspectives. We've got how firms use it, how researchers use it. I want to turn to Professor Sue Turner now, OBE, who's a professor in practice here, and she uses her expertise in AI and in governance and ethics. She's got a law degree and an MSc in artificial intelligence and data science, and she's been rated the world's top 100 women in AI ethics. So over to you, Sue. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes, and thank you very much for having me here with you today. I spent 50% of my career working for very entrepreneurial, very dynamic businesses, and 50% leading not-for-profits. And one of the roles that I've done with businesses is to be that lobbyist, the government relations person on the other side of the fence, trying to help achieve whatever the particular company's mission was. So I'm going to talk about, can we use AI to have positive impact in this sphere of gambling? And in that, I want to share some of the insights that I've gained from being on the other side of the fence, being one of the lobbyists, and try and put the two together. When I did my master's degree in AI and data science, that was back in 2020, and I was very much motivated by what I'd seen happening in not-for-profits and the charity where I was chief executive at the time, about how all sorts of organisations were using data and technology for their own ends and in ways that weren't necessarily beneficial to ordinary people. And I was particularly concerned about how we're shifting power and putting more and more power in the hands of a tiny number of people and organisations. And one of the books that I read when I was doing my master's degree was the book that I'm sure all of you have read, called Punters by Aaron Rogan. And I was really struck by there, as Raffaello was saying, just how much data gambling companies have and how sophisticated they've been over many, many years in the way that they use it. So that has given me this general interest in how we can make the world fairer using data and recognise how power is being shifted. So it may seem illogical to you that I'm talking about using AI for positive impact in gambling, but I hope you'll see in the next couple of minutes how I'm bringing those two together, because I think we do have a real opportunity here to use AI for prediction and prevention of gambling harms. So focusing in on data and technology, AI at its heart is all about computers finding patterns hidden in large amounts of data and then using those patterns to predict, to personalise and to automate things. So one of my roles is as a non-executive director, and I've been a non-exec in financial services. And there we have a thing called the consumer duty, but from the regulator, where financial services organisations need to evidence that they are treating individuals fairly, that they are treating individuals as individuals, so not just mass approaches to them, and also that they're recognising vulnerability. And one of the things some of my clients in financial services do is use AI to detect in their contact with people where they are vulnerable. So I was thinking about that when Agnes asked me to be on this panel today, and thinking, how can we use AI in that same way, using the same techniques in this sector to detect where there's harm? I think the gambling industry has been absolutely brilliant in the past at leveraging these sorts of techniques for their own benefit, as John was setting out, to keep people playing, to keep people going for spending more. And they ought to be masters at using this same data to detect vulnerabilities, but they're not. But they should be. So my hypothesis here is that the research community needs to take up the cudgels here and fight fire with fire and use the data that I'm hoping Sam will be talking about in a minute, to find these vulnerabilities. If the research community can prove that advanced predictive modelling leads to early and reliable detection of potential vulnerabilities and potential harmful behaviour, then we need to make it irresistible to regulators, not just in the UK, but globally, to mandate that gambling companies deploy these techniques. Now, that may seem like a tough challenge. At the University of Bristol, we believe very much in research for bold and ambitious goals. And I think this is aiming high, but I think that's what we need to do. We can't rely on the slow pace of social norms or incremental change to get us where we need to be in detecting these harms. It needs to be regulators and policymakers that make the change. And it's got to be mandatory and a commercial reality. So two things I'm suggesting need to be done. First of all, on the front of predicting, modelling, early detection, most efforts currently preventing gambling harm are reactive, so they rely, for example, on individuals recognising that they may have a problem, they may need help, or on simple rules-based flags. AI and machine learning allow us to do much more, to pivot from being reactive to being predictive. And instead of relying on often unreliable self-reported data, we need to be using AI to analyse those vast real-time data sets of player behaviour, betting patterns, deposit frequency, time of day, and so on. And that should allow researchers to develop sophisticated predictive models that can flag an individual at risk before they perhaps recognise the issue themselves. So it's an early warning system with precision that we couldn't have achieved with the systems and data that we had in the past. Secondly, we need to be showing regulators themselves that AI is incredibly important in uncovering complex behavioural markers. So as AI can help us go beyond simple metrics, for a human, as we've been hearing, to look through millions and millions of records, for example, of particular individuals' transactions is impossible. But for AI, it's a pretty standard task. So AI can analyse how an individual's behaviour might change, for example, after a big win or after a significant loss. It can pinpoint those subtle patterns which might be an indicator of chasing losses, for example. And that then can move to complex behavioural markers that indicate deeper harm. This level of sort of granular analysis gives us powerful new tools to understand the psychology and the behavioural economics of gambling harms too. The UK government, as Alex Ballinger has set out, is interested in changing the debate. And I think this really is the time when we need to capitalise on that opportunity. And I would say also we need to make sure the regulator is mandating independent audits of the models that operators use to check the metrics and to check the results are actually fair. As leaders in this field, I expect you're already ahead of me and thinking, okay, nice in theory, but how do we put it into practice? For this plan to work, we need evidence, and that needs research. The research community needs to be able to prove that it's possible for gambling companies to predict, detect, and take action in the way that I've outlined. Automated warnings, even turning off access entirely and early enough when certain behaviours are predicted. And that is about establishing a clear, reliable standard of care. Secondly, we need to provide that irrefutable evidence that makes it irresistible for regulators to take action, to have these mandatory rules that force the industry to deploy the same technology that they use for engagement, but use that for prediction instead. And that's how I believe we can be bold and ambitious in changing this and fighting fire with fire. But all of that I've been talking about really hangs on data. We need ideally real data from the gambling operators themselves, or there may be other data sets which we can use, which is a perfect point for me to stop because Sam has some of those answers.
Thank you so much, Sue. That's absolutely fantastic. And we do have regulators in the room. There are members of the Gambling Commission. So the lobbying has started now, and now we'll produce more evidence and carry on the lobbying. I'd like to introduce Sam McGregor now. Sam McGregor's from Smart Data UK. She's the Deputy Director of Smart Data Research, and this is part of the UK Research and Innovation, so where the UK government funds our research. So a perfect segue into what is UKRI doing to try and solve this problem and take it forward. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks so much, Agnes, and thank you to Sue and Raffaello as well, because hopefully this will lead on quite well. And I'm also going to start with a bit of a provocation that I've actually stolen from Ben Goldacre, which is data's not like oil, it's more like nuclear material with huge potential to do good, but intrinsic risk if it's not handled well. And I'm starting here because when we talk about gambling harms, as you will all know, we're talking about real lives and real risks. And I think it's really important that we have a strong and joined up approach to data and evidence-based decision making if we're going to make any sort of a real difference in this space. So as Agnes said, I've got the privilege of working with Smart Data Research UK, and we're a programme that's focused on making it possible for researchers to access and use what we call smart data, so data generated from our everyday interactions with digital environments and physical environments, including a variety of sources from sensors, satellites, through to consumer transactions and online platforms data. It's also worth noting that our definition of smart data goes somewhat broader than the government's definition of smart data, which is mostly focused on sort of open data and with more of a consumer focus. Ours is much more about the research access. So we're part of a much wider network of UKRI-supported data infrastructures that includes the UK Data Service, which many of you will be aware of, Administrative Data Research UK, Health Data Research UK, Population Research UK, and we all support researchers in a lot of different ways, right? So we're about enhancing access to data and delivering user-friendly services, providing guidance on ethical and legal issues, engaging with the public public, supporting skills development to use data and methodological innovation. And we also try and help as much as we can to drive new insights and impacts and positive difference from the data that we make available. So I'm going to use my time today to talk a bit about the types of data that are out there for research, specifically on gambling harms, the possibilities to do that they hold, and where I think that we could do more. So it won't be news to anyone here that research data today is as varied as the questions that we want to ask. From the types of smart data that I mentioned before, through to admin and health data that are collected through our interactions with everyday kind of government services, public services, health services, and of course the wealth of survey and other sort of traditional research data. They've all got value in the ecosystem. We want to support them all, and we do, but often the richest insights can come from combining them. And for gambling harms research, I think this is really important because the data that we have about gambling and about gambling harms don't sit neatly all in one place. Harms cut across demographics. They manifest in complex ways that have only become more complex as the ways that people can access gambling have become sort of more accessible, more pervasive. And so linking data sets from lots of different sources kind of just makes sense, because it means that we'll be able to see the fuller picture. It will enable earlier interventions, better targeting of support services, development of new policies and new practices that protect those who are at risk of gambling harm. And I'm going to give you a few examples, and some of them might be represented on posters that you'll see today, I think. So one of our own data services, the Geographic Data Service, has linked anonymized online gambling account data with deprivation indices to create national classification of gambling behaviours at a neighbourhood level. And that kind of insight can really help local authorities in informing targeted and local level prevention strategies. Another project combined open banking data with self-reported PGSI scores to explore how gambling spend can vary between high and low risk gamblers. And research like this can help not only with affordability checks and things like that, but can also help to inform banks and financial services in how they identify and respond to at-risk customers. A third project linked GP records, hospital outpatients data, and death records. And I cannot tell you actually how difficult, although they're all part of the same sort of health service, how difficult it is to do that across different parts of healthcare. So they identified that that gambling diagnoses, or they were looking to find out if gambling diagnoses predict mental health service use and suicide risk, which indeed they do, and that can inform, that kind of awareness and knowledge can inform better treatment interventions at an earlier stage, really at the point of need. But everyone will be aware, and we've talked a bit about some of the challenges today. It is not all plain sailing. Despite the potential, there are huge barriers to working in this kind of joined-up way when it comes to data. The data landscape, as I've said, is fragmented. Data is held by lots of different actors within a very complex system. Not all of that data is accessible. The data that is accessible is not always usable. There's extremely limited access to operator data, and as yet no reliable proxies for the sort of granular player level real-time data that Sue was talking about, and that could really transform our understanding of the sector. Not everyone's equipped with the skills that they need to use these types of quite messy sometimes data. We have to account for a lot of biases in the data as well. There can be ethical and legal issues to navigate, including concerns about things like privacy and consent. So in SDR UK and across the UKRI sort of network of data infrastructures, we really see trust as the glue that holds all of this together. And this is especially important, I think, for gambling, where trust is fragile and the risks are very real and potentially immediate. The trust between researchers and data owners, data controllers, the regulator and the public is absolutely essential. And we try very hard to safeguard and promote that through our governance structures, through open conversations, partnership working, and extensive programs of public involvement and engagement. We're actually also just now, we had our first meeting yesterday, convening a data working group across the levy commissioners to try and start to coordinate efforts around making data available, making it accessible for research on gambling harms, and really building those foundational building blocks to enable safe and reliable data sharing. I'm going to wrap up because I'm conscious of the time. I've shared a list, which I think there's a QR code for in somewhere, with a lot of different data resources that exist right now. I'd also encourage you all to think about your own work as well, your own research and your own kind of interests. What data would help you to answer the questions that you're most interested in, and what's stopping you at the moment from accessing and using those. I've got a colleague or colleagues here today as well, Veronica and Jada, who are just, put your hands up, ladies. Thank you. So please do come and reach out to us. We're really interested in having these kinds of conversations about how we can improve the flow of data for research and for policy where it makes a real difference for people. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's interesting that we started talking about trust and we ended talking about trust, and that's a theme that goes all the way through. If you want to have the extra information that's on this page 6 of the programme, so you can access by QR code the list of data that Sam was referring to. So we've got quite a lot of time for questions. I'll just take some of the online questions, but those in the room, please have a think. So I'm not sure who this is for, but anyone can answer. Is the main issue outdated legislation which does not empower a regulator, or a regulator not effectively using the appropriate powers they have? I don't know who would like to take that. Do you want to go?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. I mean, the regulators got quite a lot of powers, and I think we've seen in recent years how some of the really big fines that are now being imposed on betting firms for failures, for regulatory failures, and for not dealing properly with harmful gambling. And I think we've looked, there are other regulators which can really struggle with the level of fines they can impose, and they've been increased over the years. But the Commission's got quite a lot of tools at its disposal. It's also got quite a lot of tools within the regulation to take away licenses, impose conditions, and change the various rules and regulations around the way people gamble. So, for instance, those things that I mentioned have been introduced by the Commission with regard the online limits now on stakes, speed of play, for instance. So I think there's quite a lot they can do. I think it's a question of really being responsive to what the public concerns are and what the failures are. And in the context of this debate, I think it's really important that they get under the bonnet of how the gambling firms can use AI, how they are using AI, and what the risks and likely benefits are going to be. And then the other point is about getting the gambling firms to hand over more of their data, because that would be such a useful tool for researchers and then for journalists.
Can I also just come in just really quickly, because I think that gambling is somewhat unique as a policy space, in that tackling it particularly now is actually really multifaceted. Veronica and I work also on on data relating to online safety, and that is the responsibility of Ofcom. So actually gambling sitting at a nexus between multiple, you mentioned the Advertising Standards Authority as well, sitting at the nexus of multiple different regulatory regimes actually means that there's a responsibility on the Gambling Commission, of course there is, but I think that increases the complexity of tackling the issue because it sits across multiple regulatory spaces and not always are those regulators talking to each other about these specific issues.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know, Alex, do you want to say anything on the subject while you're still in the room? Not putting you on the spot or anything, you know.
So I suppose I agree with John on the powers of the regulator, but there are lots of gaps, particularly on advertising. Raffaello could talk to this because I've been reading a lot of his research that the regulators like the ASA and others are completely ineffective at doing, and the amount of advertising that is now moving on to the influencers and social media that is not attributed to advertising is a massive problem that there's no real regulatory answer to at the moment. That's one example. There's lots of others that kind of cross over into these different spaces that really need government to take a hard look at changing the law.
Thank you. So
I think regulation always lags behind what technology can do. So one area that we've been doing some lobbying on is to say to lots of different regulators, not just in this space, that they really need to up the skills that their people have in order to be thinking about what the opportunities are to use the regulatory powers they already have, but change those and look out for opportunities where AI can help them as a regulator, but also spot what the sector that they're regulating is doing with the technology.
yeah, thank you very much. Do you have any questions in the room? Yep.
Hello, Niroshni from Fast Forward. So my question is to Raffaello regarding the accuracy of the AI. I understand you mentioned some parts of it, like how it couldn't pick up where the logo is from. But even in general, when we use AI, if you ask back the question, like how sure are you about it, it gives some funny answers. So I'm just trying to understand, like how accurate is that? Has there been any other recheck or pilot thing that has been done before to see if the results are accurate? And I'm just trying to know if that will be an under or overestimation of the issue. Yeah. Thank you very much.
So just to clarify, so all of the work that we've been published so far has been done by humans, so this is extremely accurate. The experimental kind of phase we're still in with the AI, where it's at 96% accuracy compared to human coding. So basically, so it's not, we don't use ChatGPT or something like that. So we use pre-existing models that we download. It's all data scientists. I don't really know what they do. I just tell them what we need to do is we need to detect the logos. Can you help us to do that? And then we work together on this. There's some circumstances, for example, where AI is a bit too perfect. So for example, if you imagine watching a football game, right? The camera moves and you see one person in the audience wearing a shirt with a big, I don't know, Bet365 logo on. AI sometimes says, oh, I saw one. We as humans wouldn't count that because that's not really you don't really see it unless you search for it. So there's like these differences, or sometimes when there's hoardings behind the football, the goal, right? And the goal has a net. So the net is distorting the visuals, and then AI can't see that, for example, or reads a different brand. So there's like these minor differences, but yeah, in the end we came to 96%, finding the same results as the humans, which I think is probably as good as we get for now. But no, to reassure you, we don't use ChatGPT, and it's not lying to us. It's all very it's a bit different than that. But very good question. 96% accuracy in the AI world is really pretty good. I've worked with some models where it's sort of 66%, and you go, okay, it's better than 50-50, but it's not brilliant. But anything when we get into the 90s, we're getting pretty confident that we've got a model we can rely on.
Thank you. Someone's got a microphone. Go for it.
Hi, Sally Gainsbury. I'm Professor in Psychology at the University of Sydney. Thank you very much for your contributions. I was interested, John, in your mention of the subject acquisition request. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but my question for the panellists is, what would happen if the data were put in consumers' own hands, that people were able to easily track their spend, their wins, their losses, and their net outcomes? Would that be a tool that could be of use in preventing and identifying gambling harms from a consumer perspective?
So the tool that is used for getting hold of that data in the UK is a subject access request. And I just wanted to just slightly loop back on the issue of regulation. This also falls under the auspices of the Information Commissioner's Office.
Yeah.
So for instance, gambling sites can track the fact that you visit them, and then they can share cookies with other sites, and there have been issues around whether proper consent has been obtained for that before they share it with Facebook and other social media, which then may market materials at you. And this is something the ICO has looked at, but I think with a bit more power and resources, it could do a lot more. But certainly, the more information that you can put in the hands of the players, the better. I think one of the big issues that people who've become addicted to gambling have had is they've wanted to stop gambling. They understand they're gambling too much. They kind of don't need the data to show they're gambling too much. They're in the grip of something which they find really, really difficult to deal with, and they feel quite powerless. And in that context, the gambling firms are still marketing at them in many cases, even when they've asked or tried to ask for that not to happen. And I think that's certainly as big or bigger an issue than getting hold of the data.
Thank you. Anyone else like to pick up that issue of putting the data into consumers' hands?
I will, yes. We've actually got a data service that we are funding from Smart Data Research UK called the Smart Data Donation Service. It doesn't specifically have a remit to collect data from gambling customers, but that is one type of data. They essentially invoke Article 20 of GDPR, which is the data portability subject access request route, and they're also accompanying that with a program of kind of data literacy for people who are then getting that data from the platforms, from the companies. They have Reddit, they have YouTube users, and putting that into their data service to then be made available for research projects, but accompanying that in a very ethical way with as I say, the appropriate data literacy and engagement with the cohorts of data donators, because that's the real key bit is the literacy. You can tell people and show a bunch of graphs about someone's particular spending habits, but actually knowing what that means, practically speaking, and being able to then make the cognitive leap between, oh, that looks high, I'd better stop, especially as John says, when you're in that moment, you're cognitively impaired, so it's not necessarily the best way. But I just want to say what is going on in Australia. The Australian Internet Observatory is doing some amazing work with ad tracking. So just wanted to say that because I met with a guy from there recently, and it was fascinating work. So yeah.
Thank you. I'll take another one from online. It says it was mentioned that in Belgium, I think it might have been you, Raffaello, that operators are required to share their data with researchers. So the question is what type of data and whether this obligation is established by law.
Yes, it is. It is established by law. I think it has been. So Belgium obviously has transformed a lot of the kind of the gambling legislation over the last 5 years or so. So everything is quite new in Belgium. They've opened up the market, noticed fairly quickly that wasn't the best idea. They've, all marketing forms were legal to merge, but they felt completely bombarded with, actually within a couple of years, after 2 years of completely an open market, they then restricted gambling marketing, and they have actually quite strict guidelines. A lot of forms of gambling marketing are now completely banned in Belgium. But as part of this legislation, they had this clause in the law, and it's quite interesting because I was talking to one of the researchers. So it was part of the legislation, but then no one really used it for like a year or two because it was hidden in the legal text and it's complicated and stuff. But then one of the researchers noticed that, and they've started making inquiries with their gambling commission, and then yes, the operators had to give the data. There was obviously some teething problems, so apparently different operators used completely different formats of data, so the researchers really struggled to make any sense of what is happening. But yes, it has been legislated, and I think that there's going to be the first couple of papers probably out in the next couple of years showing what's been happening. I think that's wonderful. I think
excellent.
There's so much hidden away in kind of how algorithms work, how data is targeting people, that somebody needs to, as you've said, like an audit or at least giving researchers access is absolutely vital to get a understanding of what's actually happening.
So perhaps a trip to Brussels with the gambling minister might be a good thing to do. A bit of note comparison. I think we've got a question over here.
Yes, Marlene Diagala, Public Health, Haringey Council. There's a difference between trawling through data and using AI to trawl through data and data accuracy. For example, we're working with GPs and we found out that GPs didn't even know the gambling codes to put into for their patients. So often their patients are coded under anxiety, depression, suicide, and they didn't even realise. So we're doing some training about that, but how can we make sure that this is a countrywide issue that's going to be addressed?
I will come in on that, if that's okay. Yeah, I think this is a prime example of where being able to join up across data owners and across parts of the system to inform our understanding of gambling harms is really, really important, because exactly as you say, no one's out there disclosing in a GP appointment that their gambling behaviours. It's not commonplace, and we know that that treatment and prevention services have been largely delivered by charities and local authorities. And that fragments the data landscape then even further. So that's part of the effort that we're going to with this working group that I mentioned, because nobody has really taken a good look at this before. The new levy is very, very welcome, of course, but there's a lot of work to do to build solid data and evidence foundations before we can really start to measure success. And it really wouldn't surprise me either if actually what we see is an uptick in gambling harms because we're recording it, because we're recognizing it, because it's coming through in the data a lot more before we see any kind of successful tackling in the data as well.
Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, I think Alex touched on this earlier about the importance of the Department of Health being involved and public health being involved in dealing with gambling problems. And I think if we look historically, that when you go, if you have financial problems or you have health problems, the people who are there to help you will often think about whether you've got maybe alcohol problems or whether you might have a drug addiction. But the gambling addiction hasn't really been on the kind of the scale for them, and the index of questions that they answer. And I think that's improving now with the NHS. We've got these new gambling clinics which are providing treatment. So I think it is getting more joined up. But there needs to be more awareness, and there needs to be more GP training and more training of professionals to recognise where people who may be depressed in financial problems or having difficulties in mental crisis, whether gambling may be involved, in asking the right questions to find out about that.
Thank you very much. So we're at the end of the session. We've got a coffee break now, though, for 15 minutes. The panelists are all around, so please grab them if you have other questions. Could you all join me in a rousing round of applause for our panelists? Thank you.